Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, I want to say thanks to our God Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who's been giving some mercies and blessings so I can make this video to complete my assignment of Psycholinguistics for Language Teachers course. Secondly, may salawat and salam be with our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who has guided us from the darkness to the brightness, from the stupidity era to the cleverness era. In this video, I will explain my answer about the fourth assignment of Psycholinguistics course. Okay, the first question is, what do you know of language perception? What phenomena can be used to represent language perception? Language perception is the concept of language as a system used for understanding messages in verbal communication. Their size defines language perceptions as a psychological process carried out to attribute meaning to words, phrases, and sentences when people involved in verbal communication. In the compliance with this view, Jarjo Wijojo believes that language comprehension or language perception is our mind's effort to understand the meaning of words, phrases, clauses, sentences, or even discourse we listen to in a verbal interaction. In addition, Fontenay et al. View that language comprehension is a process carried out in a person's mind to represent information that takes him as a listener from sensory input to meaning interpretation. According to their size in psycholinguistic studies on language perception, states that those terms are often used for describing phenomena such as word recognition, understanding words' meanings, speech signal segmentation, or dividing sounds into parts or segments such as word pronunciation, stress, and intonation to understand meaning. Judgment similarities between two linguistic structures, understanding similarities in meaning between two different sentences. For example, I am hungry and I really need to eat. Okay, next, the second question is, what do you know of language perception stages? According to Warren 2013, he states that language perception occurs in 4 stages. The first stage is perception stage. This stage for noticing sound elements, for example phonological stress, intonation, from auditory inputs. The second stage is word recognition. Stage for identifying words when perceiving the sounds from the auditory inputs. The third stage is parsing stage. This stage is for identifying sentences when perceiving the sounds from the auditory inputs. And the last stage is interpretation stage for understanding meaning from the interpretation of the auditory inputs. Okay, the third question is, in your opinion, is word recognition a complex process? And explain it. According to Weber and Kronberg, argue that spoken word recognition is a complicated mental process. According to them, there are at least 3 factors that cause this complexity, including the first, many words sound similar or resemble to each other. For example, the word sun and the word some, and then the word such and the word suck. These similar words only differ in their final consonant sounds. The second, speech or pronunciation varies greatly. The quality of speech produced by each person is very different from one another depending on speaking style, speaking rate of delivery, phonological knowledge. For example, the word sun is sometimes pronounced as some or some when followed by a bilabial stop consonant like the word began. Okay, the third is speech is temporary and continuous, which means that when someone speaks, the speech conveyed will fade away immediately after the speech is conveyed. Besides, speech can also be expressed continuously from a sequence of speech sound to another without any clear boundaries depending the duration of speaking time that the person needs. Okay, next, the fourth question is, what do you know of phases of word recognition? Frauenfelder and Tyler, 1987, explained word recognition process. There are three phases occur. The first phase is the phase of initial lexical contact. Initial contact functions to activate words that are considered relevant based on linguistic aspects. For example, phonology or pronunciation, syntax or word class, semantics or meaning, and also context or pragmatics. Okay, the second phase is the phase of selection. After initial lexical context is carried out where the segmented auditory inputs have been connected with prospective targeted words, the next mental process occurs is that the mind carries out a selection process to determine the most relevant and appropriate words to represent the auditory input previously perceived. The selection process is conducted by the mind in several ways. For example, distinguishing between one word to the other. Okay, the next phase is the phase of integration. And this is the last phase. In this phase, the mind works to combine the words chosen through the selection process with the interpretation of the meaning in the auditory input. The combination of relevant words with the interpretation of meaning is called word recognition, by which the words are organized, matching in terms of linguistic aspects such as phonological, syntactical, semantical, and pragmatic aspects of the speech sound. Okay, the fifth question is, what do you know of parsing stage, and what process takes place in the stage, and what types of knowledge does the mind need to go through the process? Parsing is a process of assembling words that have been recognized in the perception stage and assigning meaning attributes to the series of words so that auditory inputs can be understood as sentences with syntactic structures and semantic representation. Frazier, 1987, calls this kind of process as syntactic parsing. She further defines syntactic parsing as a process of constructing meaning from word to sentence level, based on lexical and phonological information from auditory inputs at the perception stage. In this regard, Dow, 2023, believes that in the parsing stage, a process called sentential processing is taking place, by which the mind attempts to understand the relationship between words in sentences and attempts to obtain meanings of the sentences representation from the auditory inputs. Besides that, Crocker 2016 also believes that sentence processing is a process by which phonological and semantic aspects of words of an utterance are combined to produce the interpretation of a sentence conveyed in a speech during spoken interaction. The sixth question is, what do you know? Interpretation stage and discourse processing. The interpretation stage can be defined as a process where the mind is able to show understanding of the speech heard when communicating. Sparks, 2010, are the opinion that whether mind is working for comprehending language products, such as speech or text, it means that the mind is doing discourse processing. The seventh question is, what do you know of the tripartite model in the interpretation stage? Sparks and Rapp 2010 describe the three levels of discourse processing. The first is surface level, and in this level, the mind collects words based on phonological aspect and then assembles these words into sentences that are considered most relevant to represent their meaning on basis of the auditory inputs. The second level is proportional level. In this level, the mind encodes the underlying meanings of language. This involves understanding meanings in a morphosyntactic order by connecting prior knowledge of context with linguistic contents to build inferences about the meanings of discourse, verbal exchange. So the mind will only insert meanings in sentences that match the content and exclude various meanings that don't match the contents. The last level is situational or mental level. In this level, the mind has succeeded in inferring the meaning in speech effectively by combining all linguistic knowledge and discourse context in auditory input. This level provides the acquisition of successful comprehension. Now the last question is, in sum, can you explain the perception stage as a whole? The perception stage can be carried out well if we have two factors. The first is performance. Performance refers to the ability of our ears to perceive sounds which then can be processed by our minds with the help of the second factor. The second is competence. Competence refers to knowledge of language we have. For example, knowledge of the words and sounds we hear, which is stored in our mental dictionary. By using the competence, the mind is able to perform the auditory encoding function, which allows us to describe and distinguish sounds phonetically and phonologically. Detecting speech usually involves using the auditory cortex, which is located not far from our ears, which means that when speech sounds are transmitted to someone's ears, the auditory cortex in the person's brain will immediately identify the sound in the form of different phonetic sequences and finally perceive them as distinct syllables and words. Therefore, if the performance and competence factors are met, then speech perception can occur where we can hear, segment, and interpret the sounds of language. In addition to auditory cortex, Wernicke's area is another important area in the brain which functions to continue the task of auditory cortex to the next stage. namely assembling the identified phonetic and phonological sequences to be attributed with context and meanings. It is the Wernicke's area which performs the function of receiving information from the auditory cortex and identifying words' meanings, and finally sending information to angular gyrus area for gaining perception or comprehension of the speech. Okay, I think that's all from me. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.